Okay, so this is going to be using the data file Know Thy Customer. It is found on D2L with the rest of the data at this location. Content. It loads slowly. Data files. Chapter 4 data files. And at the K's. Oh, and then load it again. Thank you. Know Thy Customer. So, please, everyone download this file and follow along with me. If you do not follow along with me, good luck on your own. That's my threat. Really, it's more like a blessing, but it sounds like a threat. Know Thy Customer. Content. Data files. Chapter 4 data files. In fact, go ahead and write this. I was hoping that this would fit. I could get the camera to show the board as well, but that doesn't seem to be possible. I can mess with the zoom settings, but I don't think it's going to happen. Okay. Again, if you have your book and you want to follow along, it's on page 159. However, I think you'll find that there's very little in the book that's instructive. But I wanted to point you at it in case you wanted to refer to this later. Again, the case project is more intended to kind of point you in a direction and let you explore. So it's a little light on the instructions, hence the demonstration we'll do now. So what you should be looking at is something that looks like this. Age, income, married, children, car, and mortgage. Now I could zoom in, but it kind of doesn't matter because we're about to go away from the screen anyway. Yes?
Is there any way to make the ribbon, like when it pulls down?
To make it stay?
No, to make the whole page move down with it.
You mean the ribbon up at the top, yeah?
Yeah.
Yes, there's a button in the bottom right corner of the ribbon. It's this guy all the way over here. If you click, well, mine's loading, hold on. Okay. Oh, and you can't see it. Great. Yay, overscan. Fantastic. Okay, well, in the top right corner, fun fact, did you know that TV signals used to keep channel information and other things like that along the border of the picture? So televisions would crop the outside of the picture in order to use that information for other things. So that's why if you plug in a computer to a TV screen, there's often an issue where there's a little bit of bleed around the outside. Even though that hasn't been a relevant technology in 20 years. But it's still built that way. Fun facts. Or at least I think they're fun. You can decide what you think. Okay, so that little arrow right there is what you want it to look like. Now, in your case, in Tony's case, it will be in the form of a little pin up there. If it's already pinned, you won't have. So it toggles between a pin, like a thumbtack, and an arrow. So if there's an arrow, you're good. It's already doing what we want. If when you click the button it hides stuff, then pull it down and click on the pin, and it should keep things oriented the way you want. Got it, Tony?
Just
I am so lost.
Actually, that might work. Well,
I was thinking like
so if you click the arrow like I did, you're creating the problem that he started with.
Okay, now what are we going to get there?
Okay. So, what I want you all to do is to be on this data mining tab. If you don't have a data mining tab, this is a really good time to tell me. 3 people? 3 folks with no data mining? Okay, so the way this works, you go to File, you go to Options, and then Add-ins. File, scroll down on the left side to Options. Oh, I kind of went through that quickly. All right, File, and the File menu, Options is the last thing on the left that you can't see. Awesome. Okay. How about now? Can you see it now? All right, that'll do. Okay, so Options on the far left. Click on Options. Click File. That's step 1. Then click Options. Then our next to last thing on the left is add-ins. Now, depending on your installation, this may lag pretty significantly. I found that it's gotten faster in recent months, recent years maybe, but this used to take several seconds to load. You didn't break anything, don't worry. Just wait for it to come up. It should look like this. So the next step is to click on this drop-down arrow. So this is File, Options, Add-ins, and then you click on this drop-down here. This is a list. You cannot interact with it. It's a pretty picture, basically. So down here, change Excel add-ins, which sounds good, to Camm add-ins, which I believe stands for commercial. Commercial add-ins. Change the drop-down to commercial add-ins and click the Go button. Is that everybody? Looks like it. Roster? Everyone get the roster. Everyone here is recorded as being here? Okay, once you have Camm add-ins, click Go. And then you will see this little box right here. And the top option should be, it's alphabetic, so I don't think there's going to be anything above it, which is Analytic Solver add-in. If you already have your data mining tab, don't do anything. Don't move, don't breathe, don't do anything. Boo! That's an, anyone know that reference? That's A, old, and B, kind of niche. It's a Disney movie, though. Tickling some brains? While you're thinking about this, everyone who did not have data mining tab, have it now. What can happen is you won't have the tab, but that box is checked. That's usually it's a glitch, I think, between another add-in. And if you uncheck it, hit OK, and then go back to the menu and check it again, it'll work the second time. Yes, Ethan.
So we're supposed to check the Analytic Solver box, and then click OK.
Check Analytic Solver and click OK. If it's already checked but you don't have the tab, uncheck it. Click OK, that will fully re-unload it, and then go back and actually load it again. And then when it loads, it'll usually unload the conflicting package. Usually. Didn't work, did it?
It's like asking me for some S&P capital like.
Oh, I ignored that. That's not us. I thought about emailing I was upset and I wanted them to come fix something, at least. So I thought about telling them, like, well, okay, my stuff works, but this still doesn't. And it's in the way, and I don't like that. It's like a stool on the rug. You have to walk around it. You walk around it, not a big deal, but it's annoying having to walk around it. That's how I feel. I don't like it. Okay. Atlantis the Lost Empire, by the way. Not that old. Okay, let's actually do something with our last few minutes, 24 minutes. Okay, so we have above here. Let me magnify this because it's hard to see. Several tools. Oh, it's doing nothing. Fantastic. My personal favorite. How about now? Okay, so at the top here, you'll see several things.
Can you give me only 1 minute? That would be good. Only 1 minute.
What about the last 7? Come on. Look, I'm not saying I don't want you to participate. Oh, that was the computer that was freaking out last time, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'll let it go this time. Even more. That's right. Okay, so you see several things along the top. And for now, anyway, you can ignore basically everything except for the Data Analysis tab. There are some niche applications for the other things. They're built into the software for a reason. But for the purposes of our class, we're just going to worry about Data Analysis tab. Which you need to be really careful because you will find buttons with the same name, but different layout in other tabs. And that's not good. Because you'll be like, I'm looking for KMeans clustering. And you're just clicking on stuff. And then you find KMeans clustering and you go, great. And then it'll have like checkboxes and options in the dialog that are not talked about in the tutorial. And you're like, why the heck is this here? Because you clicked on the wrong drop down. So if what you're seeing is not matching, you probably clicked over here in data mining. Don't do that. I'm warning you. This happens all the time. I see it all the time. People click on here, they find the thing they're expecting, and they go, great, but it's different, and it doesn't work right. So, data analysis, the one on the left. Okay? Have I made myself clear?
Click there.
You're going to want to click on cluster. Okay? So what we're trying to do is K-means clustering. You remember K-means clustering is the one with the circles and the squares and the diamonds that I drew last time? Or I guess some stars. So, click on cluster. It'll lag and then eventually load. Okay, there it goes. And you'll see two choices. Hey, what do you know? The two choices we talked about. K-means clustering and hierarchical clustering. Now the preview of K-means clustering is covering half of hierarchical clustering. But those are your two choices. So we're going to start with K-means clustering and we'll go to hierarchical after that. So just click on the K-means clustering dialog box. Again, it's pretty slow. Excel you use because you have access to it. You should never use Excel if you want the fast option. That is the worst thing. That is my least favorite thing to do. That is the worst option. Saw me about that recently. You think of it? Okay. Why am I just lagging out? Please, kind. Okay. All right. So what do we see? We see worksheet. We see data range. Data range, data. All that stuff should populate automatically. You shouldn't have to do anything. Although that's partially because I don't remember how this one works this way. If you don't touch it, your cursor starts out in A1, so you'll get your data by default. But I think if you click off, you might throw it off about where your data is supposed to be. So if it doesn't work out properly, just make sure your cursor's over in the data, which again, it will be by default. So just leave it at the default. When you don't touch the spreadsheet, just click the data mining buttons, data analysis buttons to be good. Okay, so you see at the top, oh, I can't see mouse. You see at the top some sort of nominative information, some descriptions here. What's the worksheet tab called? What's the range we're looking at? What's the workbook name? How many rows? So you know how many observations you have? 600. And how many variables? How many columns? 7. Okay. So hopefully you already know those answers, so that's helpful. Or, so you can double check. Or if you don't know how many observations or variables you have, it'll just tell you right there. So that's a nice little fun fact. Okay. Now I'm going to get rid of the magnifiers. I want you to see the big picture here. So we have two columns here. We have variables in input data, and we have selected variables. So you basically have all choices, and then we're going to parse the variables that we want to consider in our clustering. Now, for this example, we're going to pick them all. But read the instructions carefully, because it might not be all of them. And you will really, royally mess yourself up if you include variables you're not supposed to. And usually what that means is it'll throw errors. Because maybe there's data that don't conform to this type of technique. And so the data, it'll just say like, no. It'll just reject it. And you won't know why, unless you remember my words right now. And then you probably either A, click on the wrong tab, that's the first problem, or 2, you included the wrong variables. Very common mistakes. Okay, so we're going to do them all. All you need to do is click on the first one. Again, this is really slow. It feels like it's lagging really bad. Suffer through it. Just remember that our grandparents were like this when they got first internet, when they first crossed the borders into the internet realm. The original explorers rode these babies for miles. It's not just a boulder, it's a rock. Okay, a couple SpongeBob jokes are back there. All right, cool. So, select the first one. And then, hold Shift and select the last one. 2 people went, oh my god. It's not that hard. You can do it. Hold Shift. I know you got to use both hands at once. It's kind of like driving. One hand on the wheel, one hand texting. You know what I'm saying? Right. 2 hands. No. Actually, it's no longer 10 and 2, by the way. They've changed it. It's 9 and 3 or 6 or 5 and 7. Anyway, click the first one. Hold Shift. Click the second one. I'm hoping that all conversation in the room is about these instructions, because we're struggling enough without the distractions.
I heard that.
I try to be the entertainment for the people who are bored, so please let me have that responsibility. If it's not up to par, I'll work hard.
I love public class.
That's going to be on the video because you're right next to the camera. Awesome. Okay, so everyone got the data selected. You're right next to the camera, so that's going to be on the video. It's going to be fantastic. If I ever get fired and I have to go to an interview, they're going to be like, how do you know I'm going to be a good teacher? I'll just play that clip. Me telling stupid jokes, and then Tavis is like, I love this class, man. Okay, so you got everything selected. Next thing you do is click the little arrow. Poof. Just like magic, everything moves from this side, it's cut in half and rearranged and back together. She's alive on this side. Yes, Tony.
Mine says something.
I'm sure it does.
Some variables cannot be selected because they contain error, empty, or non-numeric values and cannot be selected for analysis.
Which one of my 2 problems is it? Well, it can't be number 2 because I told you. You have unchecked first row contains headers. Or possibly, for some reason, Excel ignored the defaults and gave you that. That should fix it.
So check it.
Check that box. You should have first row contains headers checked. If not, it will not run. The difference is, by the way, so the immediate tell, the immediate obvious tell is your variables should be named. Age, female, income, married, children, car, and mortgage in the order they're presented over here. If you see var1, var2, var3, var4 like Tony had, it's not going to work. Oh, but it's easy to fix. Just check first row contains headers and it should work.
Hold on, I'm actually trying something different.
That's a bold strategy, Cotton. See if it pays off. It seems like it worked. All right.
So exit that real quick. And then press on any of the cells. Like inside the press on Control A. And now do the cluster.
Okay, we're getting there. So I think what I'm hearing is that Tony did not have the data. He did not have his cursor in the data when he clicked on the data mining buttons, the data analysis buttons. And as a consequence, same issue.
Yeah, but it didn't work first time like me.
Okay, well, check the box. Should fix it.
Yeah, is your box checked?
So once you have 7 variables in this column, click the next button. Okay, so that basically all you have to worry about on the previous tab is what variables do you want. So get it on the right side, whatever you want, and click next. So here we have a handful of choices. Top left we have a checkbox, normalize input data. Something not good? Not working? Okay, we'll worry about it later. We are running out of time, so I'm happy to troubleshoot with you later, but let's get this going. So, normalize input data. Normalizing the input data says to convert from whatever the absolute relative, like the absolute normal words, normal numbers, 10,000 to z-scores, which has its place. But it also removes the scale of your data, which makes interpretation more difficult. However, it makes data comparisons easier. In terms of our class, you will have instructions. It will tell you specifically one thing or another. Let's see, what does it say again? It does not appear to tell us. However, I will tell you that in this case, you will want to check normalize input data. And the reason is you have data. This is the same thing from our example slides, our example in the slides. It's the same data set. You have variables with wildly different scales. And so when it comes time for clustering or distance measurements, the distances will be based entirely on the large scale. In this case, income.
So check it.
So check it. Check it out. Normalize input data, check. Okay, so what do we have left? Number of clusters. That's a number that you just type in. 2, 5, 7. Doesn't matter. Just type in a number. There is a limit. Our software is limited. I don't know if the number of clusters is limited. It probably is. And I don't know what it's limited to. Number of iterations, I believe, is capped at 10. They might have changed that, but last time I taught this class, it was capped at 10, which was awkward because the homework question would tell you to do 50. And it wouldn't run. So if that happens, put in 10. As far as I know, that's the only limitation where what the book asks for, we can't give them. So, if it's specifically the number of iterations, 10 is fine. Okay.
2 is fine for clusters?
For now. Now, the whole point of this question, actually, is to explore the differences in numbers of clusters. What happens when we change the number of clusters? And so we'll have to, I want you to see that as we go. So we'll see it in a moment. So for now, I don't want to get into too much detail about what that does, but just for now. The point is, that's where that number goes. We're going to fiddle with it in a moment. And in an exam question, a homework question, I might specify, run with k equals 5. K equals 7, k equals 10. I may tell you, or I may say, search between k equals 3 and k equals 7 and tell me which value you think is the best, which is what we're being tasked with in this example. So I'm doing the harder form for our example. And we'll talk about what we see as we go along. Okay, number of iterations. I told you before that what you end up with in your final clusters is actually not a guarantee. And in fact, depending on where you start, you will actually get, and the randomness that can happen throughout the algorithm, or I guess what's in the beginning of the algorithm, you can have different outcomes. So there are 2 things on here that allow us to, or 3 things, the remaining 3 things, allow us to account for this randomness. So the first thing we have on the right, so that's the number of iterations. How many times do you want to run this procedure? Because you're going to get different answers each time, and then Excel will go back and kind of work with you about what you got each time and put it all together. So you could just choose, do it once and give me what I get. That's an option. However, we will always, in this class, run it several times. I believe, but I can't think of any exceptions, and usually it's 10, because it's the most we can do. Okay, so that's number 1. Number 2, options. We have fixed start. And we have random start. It's an option, as it tells you. So the fixed start says that you use the same starting point for all the iterations. Or do you want to pick different starting points for each of the iterations? That's an option. It has pros and cons. We won't talk about it in too much detail for this class, but just basically I will tell you which one to do. Usually we'll do random starts. It is just kind of assumed to be better. You should get a more truthful clustering at the expense of computation time. Now, there's one more thing, and that is set seed. Seed is a computer science term, and it has to do with random number generation. So you will, as far as I know, never need to touch this box, at least in our class. Setting a seed, in fact, you often... usually setting a seed is nice for a variety of reasons. I won't go into them all. But the easiest, most direct one for our course is that we'll all get the same answers. Even though there's randomness, if we all define the same starting point in the same algorithm, then we'll get the same result. Because, in fact, computer-based randomness is usually not random at all. It follows a particular pattern, which is meant to emulate or look like randomness. So, we define a seed, which the default seed is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 12,345, and we'll leave that alone. So, I've talked through the box. What I want you to do, number 1, check the box, normalize input data. I've already done so. Make sure that your box is checked. Number 2, let's leave number of clusters at the default, which is 2 for now. We'll come back to that in a little while. And we will change random starts. We will check the button, or toggle the button, I guess, the radio button for random starts, and then click the up arrow until it says 10. I think you can, yeah. You can click in the box and use your arrow keys if that's easier. For whatever reason, you cannot type the number in, which is triggering to me. I don't mean to use that lightly. I get really upset about it. Really upset about it. Whatever. I don't. Sorry, I gotta stop. About to go on a tangent. I hate it. It's mad. Okay, so let me show you final. Geez, I can't. How do I? Full screen. That'll work. That's what it should look like in the end. Checked box in the top left. Number of clusters 2. Iterations 10. Random starts 10. Set seed checked at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Once that's all done, click next. I'm going to fix my screen. You have 2 checkboxes. We're at step 3 of 3. We're almost done. Generally, leave these checked. Leave them checked and hit finish. Finish it. Scorpion wins. You may see a spinning wheel. You may see things chugging along on the right side. My screen zoomed in, so you can't really see.
You said click finish.
Yep, click finish. You should get something that looks a little sort of something like this. Hit it. Aaron's in the house. Get up, wanna make it fast. Yo,
Nice.
check it out. Guess what happened to me? Another crazy soul read. Come on, AC.
So what is this all about?
I'm so glad you asked. Everybody here? Because if I start talking while all the heads are down and you're clicking, no one's listening. So that's why I'm bringing up childhood memories of Aaron Carter's
I'm
songs.
always listening even when I'm not.
That's what I like to hear.
Even when I'm not.
Even when you're not. Yep. I know how that is.
Like Scarface, I always tell the truth. Even when I lie.
Yep. 90% of the time works every time, right?
Ron Burgundy.
Okay. Everybody here. In the words of Mr. Garby, are y'all feeling me?
Okay, it's something ain't right here, man.
What?
Oh, okay. I think I got it now.
Cool.
No, I don't. Hold on.
What? I'm in limbo.
Got it. No, your box says something different than that.
Which box?
He left time.
You may need to be.
Oh, okay.
You may if you only see like a couple things, zoom out, because you're about to do some scrolling. Okay, so this first part up here, the whole thing on my screen right now, you've got a little bit of stuff at the top. You can ignore it. It's just like, how long did it take to read the input data? I don't care. So feel free to ignore it. I certainly do. The next thing, you can ignore this if you're confident you typed your inputs in correctly. However, I will just tell you, in my experience with students, don't be confident in that. I love you, of course, and I would never insinuate anything about you. I've just seen a lot of things go wrong. And what happens is people beat their head against the keyboard for like 45 minutes, and then I walk over and I'm like, oh, you forgot to check the box. And they're like, ah! Like out loud. It happens a lot in exams. It's distraction to the rest of the class. Please don't do it. Okay? Just check your input. Make sure what you have here matches what the question is asking for. Okay. Random starts. So you're going to see what was the center of the cluster for cluster 1. Because remember, we said k equals 2. We told them how many clusters there were. 2 of them. So we see where they started out. Guess what? I kind of don't care. I'm going to scroll right on past those. Great. Thank you, Excel. You're fantastic. Okay. Cluster centers. K-means clustering did not converge after requested number of iterations. Okay, that's not good. So what you're wanting is you run enough iterations where you start seeing a pattern. And when I say you, I mean Excel. Excel is going to use something called convergence theory. Don't ask. And it's going to try and figure out where the real clusters are with some heavy air quotes. Okay? So we don't have enough iterations here, which is why the book asks for more in certain circumstances. So you're going to see this on occasion. I'm sorry. I'm pretty sure we're limited. I'm not going to bother finding out. It doesn't really matter for the purposes of the class, though. We can talk about it as if it did converge. It's better if it does, but we can talk about it anyway. So, cluster centers. Remember, on the picture I drew on the board the other day, we had a two-dimensional picture. And I could show you exactly how far left and how far up each of those two centers were, right? This is a multi-dimensional, in this case, 7-dimensional equivalent. So wherever that epicenter is can be drawn in 7 dimensions.
Is it because of the 7 variables?
Because of 7 variables. Exactly. So I can look where was I centered on each of these variables. Now remember, these are no longer the same data they were before. These data values are now standardized. They are in z-scores. Which means, if you want to know what number 0.06 means, you have to go back and convert. If you remember in 368 we did that. Z-scores to x values and x values to z-scores. You got to do it again. Or just don't. I won't ask. So if you really feel the need to do so, go for it. It's actually not that hard to do in Excel. It's just another step. I'm not going to do it today. Okay, so what do we see? Nothing at this gym level. Please go away. Okay, so what do you see? A negative z-score, negative 0.68, about half a standard deviation. All that you really need to know is below average. If the center is on 0, then the center of the cluster is average. Note, that doesn't tell you pretty much anything about what's in the distribution. It just says as much as is on this side of the cluster is as much that's on that cluster for a particular variable. Could be nothing. Could have boatloads of data. The more central a variable is, the closer the value is to 0 in the center, the less that it is influencing the cluster. So the less you need to worry about it. The only thing you need to worry about are values that are large, which I start calling them large around 1. If they're like 4, that's big news. If they're like 0.8, it's like, okay, that's noteworthy. So look at this one, for example. 0.6 was like, okay, that's big enough to care. So, all right, what do we see? Cluster 1, below average. Cluster 2, above average. Suggests cluster 1's got young people. Cluster 2, older people. Just relatively. I don't know my data set, so I don't know what that means. Is that 50? Is that 30? What's old? No idea. I just know relatively speaking. Again, that's the downside to standardization. It's like I have no idea what that actually means. I just know it's above average, below average. But that's still good. That's still okay because I'm knowing that age is a deciding factor here. Age is coming into account. How about gender? 0.1 and 0.15, negative and positive? That's circumstantial, probably. That is probably not significant. It's just by coincidence that this one happens to have more female than this one. Not a big deal. Income. Okay, bigger number, small, and the negative number. Clearly, cluster 2 has higher levels of income. Marriage is not a factor, less than 1/10 of a point on either of these. 1/10 of a point on children, so that's pretty insignificant. Car, again, not taking into account very much. And mortgage is pretty much ignored. So, in conclusion, age is the deciding factor here. Income is the deciding factor. And that's it. The other 5 clusters are being ignored.
How do you know that?
I mean, the other 5 variables. Because the numbers are close to 0. Okay, let me say it again. Numbers close to 0 don't really tell you anything. They are probably largely being ignored in the clustering algorithm. They are not being taken into account. It's just because it might not be that they're unimportant, but we told the algorithm it can only have 2 clusters. Only 2. And so it said, fine, I'll differentiate using age and income. Now, what happens if we have more clusters? Well, we might be able to define our groups with more detail. We'll talk about that on Thursday.
What happened?